Now, back in week 2, we discussed the requirement of classical logic that the objects named by its constants must actually exist. And we noticed that this has the rather strange result that names like Pegasus, Santa, and so forth, whose objects don't exist, in a certain sense refer all to the same thing, namely the empty set. That strikes some people, at least, as a bit odd. And with this in mind, we turn to so-called free logics, which don't have this requirement that the objects under discussion exist. Now, in looking at free logic in brief, we notice that any system which doesn't require that the objects under discussion exist will have to have some way of stating that they exist. And so free logics will have a very special predicate, exists, so that we can say, for instance, that Sherlock Holmes doesn't exist, but that London does. Now, is it right to treat existence as a predicate like this? That might seem like an arcane question, but it actually isn't. There's an important historic and highly influential purported proof of the existence of God set out in Anselm of Canterbury, which at least typically is taken to require the treatment of existence as a predicate in just this way. And in this short video, I just want to set out how this proof works. All right, let's start with the denial of God's existence. So we'll say, God does not exist. And the question Anselm wants us to ask is, what does this term God refer to? And he cashes it out as that which nothing can be greater than. That is to say, God is the greatest possible object. What does this mean in terms of our logic? Well, let's think about it in terms of predicates, which describe attributes. So any attribute that it's better to have than not to have will be had by God and in the greatest degree. So for instance, justice. So we would say that God is just. Mercy, we'd say God is merciful. Wisdom, we would say God is wise. And so on for a number of other predicates which it's better to have than not to have. But wait a minute, it's also better to exist than not to exist. And so pretty soon our special existence predicate will show up on this list of divine attributes. And here we face a contradiction because our original statement starts to look like that which by definition exists does not exist. And this is a contradiction in terms. Now wait, what put us down this road? Well, we wanted to be able to talk about things that don't exist. So we introduced terms for those things, but then we wanted to be able to distinguish those things which do exist from those which don't. And so we introduced a special predicate, exists. But then it seems like the greatest possible thing must have this property which is picked out by the predicate exists, namely it must have the property of existence. And so by definition God must exist, and the denial of God's existence is inherently self-contradictory. So whether or not exists is a predicate is actually a significant matter. Now that's not to say that free logic is compelled to accept the existence of God, or that the existence of God depends on whether or not we think that existence can be picked out by a predicate, the way this proof seems to require. And actually one of the earliest and most significant objections to this came from a monk named Ganelon, who pointed out that it could be used to prove the existence of all kinds of other things that are the greatest possible thing. For instance, the perfect island in Ganelon's example. If we say that the perfect island is that island which no island can be greater than, it seems like it'll have to include existence among its attributes as well. So Ganelon, again a monk, completely rejected this proof. Responses to Ganelon's argument typically try to show that God, who is absolutely better than anything possible, is not analogous to an island which can't be the greatest possible thing, but has to be the greatest possible thing of a certain kind. Anyway, the debate's been going on for hundreds of years, and if you have any thoughts about it, I'd be happy to hear them in the comments. But one thing is for certain, what we pick out as our predicates sometimes is very important.